Dear Your Eminences and Your Holinesses, dear distinguished guests, dear sisters and brothers, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of the World Council of Churches management team to this webinar on forced displacement of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Since 1948, the World Council of Churches has accompanied the Palestinians and the Israelis in their struggle for justice and peace in the Holy Land. The Palestinians, through their continuous suffering and displacement, and the Israelis for their struggle to peaceful coexistence in the area. It is very sad to note that as of today, after so many years, we see that both Palestinian and Israeli leaderships have not been successful in achieving peace, neither through political settlement nor through armed conflicts and confrontations. We continue witnessing more mistakes and failures from both authorities and from the international political powers than we witness successful steps and willingness towards just peace for Palestinians and Israelis. The World Council, at its 10th assembly, which was held in Busan in 2013, committed itself to invite churches, people of other faiths, and people of goodwill to embark on a pilgrimage of justice and peace, believing that peace is only possible when justice is achieved. As we journey together on the pilgrimage of justice and peace, we are guided by the theologies of accompaniment and companionship as a living experience with, through, and for restoration of broken relationality between God and human beings, between human beings, and between human beings and creation. In East Jerusalem, we hear continued stories of brokenness, which has led the church leaders to warn us about the dangers of changing the status quo and the identity of the city of Jerusalem, which is a city for all, shared by all and open to all. They remind us of the need to respect the sanctity of holy sites and the dignity of all the people in this land. Discrimination against the Palestinians is only deepening the division and distancing us from peace. What we witness in Sheikh Jarrah and Swan today are examples to such behavior of wanting to change the identity of the city. Displacing people from their homes in their own homeland will only bring more animosity, not peace and coexistence. The World Council of Churches keeps working and praying that both political leaders would see this clearly, and we are hopeful that wisdom, love, and respect to life in dignity would bring both Palestinians and Israelis closer to live together on this land with equal rights in peace, justice, and security. The Church, as the body of Christ, acts by the power of the Holy Spirit to continue his life-giving mission in prophetic and compassionate ministry, and so participates in God's work of healing a broken world. In line with this understanding, the World Council of Churches remains committed to pursue peace with justice in the Holy Land. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isabel. Now we will move to a 2-minute introductory video on the situation in East Jerusalem. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the forced displacement of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. For Arabic translation, please go to the bottom of your Zoom window for the globe icon. You will find Arabic translation under Portuguese. Unfortunately, Zoom does not recognize Arabic, so you will find it under the Portuguese language. عشان تسمعوا الويبينار بالعربي لو سمحتوا تروحوا على إشارة الكرة الأرضية اللي موجودة بالزوم تحت على اليمين. هناك بتختاروا اللغة البرتغالية وبتسمعوا فيها الترجمة للعربية. للأسف زوم ما بيستعمل اللغة العربية فاضطرينا نحطها تحت عنوان اللغة البرتغالية. So my name is Yasmin Rashmawi, and I will be the moderator today. I am from Bet Sahour, from Palestine, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the World Student Christian Federation. And today we have 5 speakers to tackle the issue of forced displacement of Palestinians from East Jerusalem from different angles. I would like you to join me in welcoming our speakers, Mr. Mohammed Sabagh, Ms. Saad Abu Ramuz, Mr. Adrian Brown, Ms. Amy Cohen, and Father Jamil Khader. We will start now by streaming a recorded testimony from Sheikh Jarrah by Mr. Mohammed Sabagh, who is a resident there.
My name is Mohammed Sabagh. I live in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem since 1956. There were 4 families. They were in the High Court on 2nd of August this year. And the High Court, the judges give them, the decision to solve the problem between both of us, between the 2 sides. They give them a period of time to solve the problem because they couldn't. The judges didn't want to give a decision because it's very hard for them to give eviction for families in the neighborhood. It is very difficult for them. So they offered, to solve the problem between each other. The answer was in the past, no, there is no any kind of delegation or any kind of negotiation about what he offers. Before 2 weeks, the High Court or the judges had offered for the 2 sides, a kind of solution, but I think that this solution, we suspect about this solution. The offer was the 4 families, they have to put some money in the account of the lawyer, the other side lawyer, about 246 shekels per year, started from 1st of January 2022. And they will be protected tenants, rentals for 3 generations, just like me, my son, and my grandson. Now, this is a kind of offer we read it. Now they are waiting for us to say yes or not. If we say yes, that means that we recognize that they own the land. We are fighting peacefully in the court since 1972, from 1972 till now, according to the property of the land. Now we suspect about this kind of request. Now, if we say yes, the other part, he will say no, I don't like it. Why? Because he don't want to stay for 15 years and 3 generations till to have an eviction against any family in our neighborhood. If we say yes, we lose our our struggle, peaceful struggle in the court, by media, by the war. It happens in Gaza Strip. It was caused by our situation, as you hear about the news. I mean, during March, April, May, you see how the reaction in the whole of the war, with foreigners who were coming here to support us. They were outside and they support us in our protest against our against evicting families from our neighborhood. So now we are we don't know what to give the answer, yes or no. Both sides, if we say no, the High Court will give a decision. We don't know what kind of decision. If we say yes, that means we recognize that they own the land and they succeed to evacuate our. So we are even we are safe according to the offer. We are safe for 3 generations and something like that. We suspect about this because if they want to, if you ask for a project in the land that we stay, and if the municipality accepted the request for the other side, so that means they can evacuate the families right away. They will not wait for 15 years or 3 generations. This is the situation. Now we are discussing, we don't know what kind of decision till now. But during, before 2nd of November, we have to give them our answer. According to my family, we were in the court from the year 2009 till now. We have been, we got an eviction order. The first eviction order, it was on the year 2012. But we succeeded to freeze several times till now. We have been in the High Court. The High Court also rejected our request for to discuss the property of the land, because we have documents, proof that this land is not belong for the other side. By the High Court at that time, I remember in the year 2019, said that it was lasting. I mean, more than 15 years, and you have no right to ask for property. So this is now we appeal for the another time. Now we are in the Supreme Court, the Middle Court. The Middle Court accepted our request to appeal for the decision of the High Court, and they froze the eviction of my family. Till now, it's still frozen. We started our weekly protest in the year 2009 till now. Every week on Friday, we stand in our neighborhood, on the main road, standing with the past. I mean, for 2 or 3 years, there were many foreigners come to our weekly protest. I met hundreds of members from EAPPI. They came our weekly protest, and they every week that they send messages or letters to their land, to their governments or to their cities, what's going in Sharjah. That means that give us the proper the power to keep on struggling peacefully, non-violence. There is no any kind of weekly protest every week, just like we make. So we thank the media, the internet, our young boys who succeeded to send our situation in the whole world. As you see the reaction, demonstrations everywhere in the world. I'm sad about what happened in Gaza because it is because of our situation. EAPPI, they are not from one place. They were from several parts in the world. US, England, Sweden, Norway, Spain, Italy. I met hundreds of members of EAPPI from the year 2009 till before 2 years. Their presence there in our weekly protest proof that there are cities or governments, cities from all over the world. They want to support us. They want to come to stand by our side in the weekly protest. This is what we are asking for to come back. I hope they can come back here. We are relying on their activities in their cities, in their homes, to explain what's going on here, what's going on in Sharjah, in Silwan, and other part of Jerusalem. The ethnic, according to the ethnic evictions against people in our neighborhood, in all Jerusalem, I mean. During the last 3 months, there were many clashes with the settlers. They try to make our life hard. It's not a war bombs or something like that. It's a war of settlers.
We would like to thank Mr. Mohammed Tabbagh for his valuable inputs. Now we will move to our next speaker. Live from Silwan, we have Ms. Saad Abu Ramuz. She's a resident there. Ms. Saad, the floor is yours.
يعطيكم العافية. طبعا بحكي بالعربي أنا. طبعا أنا سعاد أبو رموز من حي بطن الهوى سلوان طبعا.
District in Silwan, in East Jerusalem. Silwan is a small village and we live in a district called Batn al-Hawa. Hay Batn al-Hawa is subject to displacement and demolition. They are asking Hawali to demolish about 86 houses so far. This dilemma and conflicts started since the 2004. They demolished a house in Batn al-Hawa area in the Bustan district village. This is a Yemeni district. In 1881, they moved to it. We have different examples, of course, and these lands are Palestinian lands. I live in one of those houses subject to demolition, under the threat of demolition. We got the demolition, the news, not through a lawyer, not through official documents. They just sent to my brother, telling him that you have a court case in the conciliation court. You have a demolition decision since 2016, and we received this decision just a year ago, 2020. Towards the end of 2020. We are one of the families in Batn al-Hawa area in the Bustan village. All of them are Palestinians. We are all strugglers. None of us wants to sell or buy. We all are here since ever, for tens of years, 1960s and 1965s. Some people are here for like about 70 years. We bought these lands or these houses since the 60s and 65s. We used to just not have contracts or anything, just a paper to be signed. During these times, it was a different way of selling and buying. And all of these documents were presented at court, and we all went to court. Obviously, the Israeli courts. The settlers also presented their case, and they just gave us a decision that we are to be displaced and that we need to leave so that they demolish our houses. In the end, we have a house. The district has a certain size, and this district is subject to demolition in total, which means they want the land to build a new settlement. They want us to leave these houses or demolish them. We will demolish it after you leave, or just demolish it yourself and leave, if you are so attached to them. We are rooted in this place, and we will not leave our houses. We will fight. Obviously, the judge will not give me the verdict. The verdict will not come in my favor. It will definitely be in the settlers' favors. And I know what will happen. Some of us got official order to leave our houses, but we appealed in the central courts. I think in May, there was family, Rajabi family. They had Anghait family and Shweiki family. Many of the families, every now and then we get those court orders. So we went to the central court to suspend these orders. In a way, they stood by us partially, and some of these orders were suspended until now. And we also have people supporting us, the peace movement, and they came up marching to the central court, and they were protesting outside to do or to apply some pressure on the court. We were peaceful, of course. The colonization authorities were there, armed, and special forces and horses, as if they are going into war to dismantle the protests. They were beating women. I was one of these ladies who were beaten by the colonization authorities and forces. And they hit old men, they hit young people, they hit kids. They do not respect any human dignity or human rights. These people are marching to the central court just to support our cause, and we try to do our best to show how peaceful we are, but that doesn't make any sense to them. They just go in, attack everybody, and try to dismantle the protests in any way possible. The judge in the central court gave us an order, a verdict. He did not give a verdict, but he transferred it to another judge. During this time, of course, we were pushed away. They used gas bombs, they used tear gas bombs, and they used water hoses and different arms to dismantle the protests. And I think about 30 people were injured in this protest. And And a week ago, we had a court session. The entire district went to this. Of course, they didn't let us in. They only let about 70 to 80 people to go into the court. This is obviously not the entire district. We are much bigger than that, and the number is much larger than that. Our lawyer presented our case, their lawyer presented their case, and at the end, we presented our evidence, and they did the same, and they deferred the session to the case to another date. So I don't know what will happen. The verdict, we don't know. We hope, of course, for a verdict in our favor, but I don't believe this will be the case. I hope that our district will not be demolished. I hope that it will be a just judge who respects his holy career and job to be the presenter and the manifestation of justice, but to give the support for the settlers, the Israeli settlers, in large sums of monies, because these people, if they seize our lands, they are making a lot of money from this, and for nothing. Of course, the settlers, they try to harass us in the streets. They get their guards in the streets. They walk in our streets harassing everybody. We really are subject to a lot of harassment, and they don't care. They don't care that we have kids, that we have ill people, that we have women. Our situation is grief, honestly. We don't want any of this, but we don't care about these harassments. We are going to stick to the ground. We will still stay on our feet. We will never give up our lands. We will never give up our houses. We will never give up our rights. And we will fight in a peaceful way, and we will protest in a peaceful way, and we will take all legal ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Saad, for sharing your testimony, your powerful testimony. Now we want to move to our next speaker, Mr. Adrian Brown. Mr. Brown was a former participant in the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Accompaniment Programme in Palestine and Israel. Please go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Yes, good evening, good afternoon. It is a great honor to be able to speak briefly here today and share a few stories from my time in East Jerusalem as a ecumenical accompanier as part of the EAPPI program. I would like to share a few photographs that I took during my time in East Jerusalem and talk a little bit about the role of the EAPPI program and what we hope to achieve by being there and what we hope to contribute to these really difficult challenges. This is the group that I was a part of, and there was a small group of us from this overall group who were based in East Jerusalem. And this is one perspective onto a part of the Silwan community that we are talking a lot about tonight. And we would visit this community quite frequently as a part of our observing and maintaining interactions and relations with key community groups. And oh, I'm sorry. So we would document demolitions when they would occur. We would gather stories from individuals who are facing eviction orders and demolition orders, and we would seek to provide protective presence in oftentimes where young people are moving around to and from school. It can be useful to have international observers there to help prevent tension and clashes. And so EAPPI also seeks very hard to document very carefully, to report out human rights, international human rights law, international humanitarian law violations as they occur. And when it comes to forced displacement, of course, these are such violations. And in Silwan, we can see just from an observer perspective, in many places, a very bold and intrusive presence that is contributing to the displacement. And this is adjacent to what is referred to as, the archaeological installation around King David. I forget the name of it, but this is a big part of the rationale that is put forward for displacing community members and justifying declaring parks areas in this area that results in forced displacement and demolition orders and eviction notices. And these are the stories that we hear. And one thing that we observed frequently everywhere we went in East Jerusalem is, as was referenced by the previous speaker, where we have settlers who set up in a home in amongst a densely populated Palestinian community. That settler family has armed guards with them at all times, and this sets off a cycle of clashes and conflict that really heavily can endanger, in particular, young men in the community who are much more commonly arrested and detained, and when clashes erupt, can be injured, and it creates a significant disruption in the community from what we were told. And we saw heard many stories of clashes, and also heard many amazing stories of community groups being formed to really give the young people a vibrant, culture-rich engagement that allowed them to not be so affected by the very significant intrusions into their community life. This is a new settler building that's being constructed amongst a densely populated Palestinian area. On the right, you can see, a surveillance post down in the valley of Silwan, and this is us walking down through, and we were just here following after a group of settlers who were surrounded by young men with machine guns and a very strong military presence. And it's, around those movements of those heavily armed and protected people that we see clashes occur. And in this community, we documented around the time of this photo, the arrest and detention of two young boys after a dispute erupted. And that's a very common story that we would report on. And demolition, unfortunately, was very common. This is a home that was occupied by a woman and her two children in the morning, and by the time she returned home, the home was destroyed, and she was not given with any notice that demolition was due that day, and by the end of the day, it was a fait accompli. The demolition was effected, and EAPPI was often the first on the scene to help to document these things and report them out. Again, in the Silwan neighborhood, another demolition, and these demolitions often are accompanied with the people who live in these homes or businesses being given a bill for the demolition costs, and also being given an order that they pay further to have the rubble taken away. And then here in Sheikh Jarrah, as Mohammed Sabak mentioned, there's a weekly protest, and EAPPI would regularly attend this as part of our contribution to supporting peaceful resistance. And this was attended by members of Jewish civil groups who also oppose the occupation and the establishment of settlements in Sheikh Jarrah. And here is an example of some of that construction. And so EAPPI seeks very much to be able to document and witness and relate out to many countries around the world of these stories, and to make sure that there is a good record of international human rights violations. And this is a Mohammed Sabah quote to me when he talked about his plight, and it really struck me. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your testimony. I just want to note, if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now we will move to Ms. Amy Cohen to tackle the issue from a legal perspective. Ms. Cohen is Director of International Relations and Advocacy at IRMIM. Ms. Cohen, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you here today. So what I thought would be good is, in order to fully understand and to grasp what is behind these measures of displacement, it's very critical to kind of zoom out and examine the context from a more macro perspective, looking at the Israeli legal system and also the overarching Israeli policies and practices that have been employed since Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967. And of course, in contravention of international law, it's largely, of course, not recognized by the international community. Okay, so first, when Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1967, it didn't annex the people. And I do this in quotes. What does that mean, annex the people? They were not conferred with citizenship, but rather permanent residency. Now, even though there is the permanent residency and permanent precedes residency, it's very misleading because it can be revoked for various reasons. So for instance, until today, around 15,000 Palestinian residents have had their residency revoked. Now, one of the things to underscore here is that this is not arbitrary. This is a deliberate, intentional policy aimed at ultimately curbing the Palestinian population. And so one of the things that I want the audience to understand here is there have been two drivers behind Israeli decision and policy making since 1967 until today. It is the territorial, but also the demographic. And so the stated goal has been to ensure and maintain a 70-30 demographic ratio. What does that mean? There has been concerted attempts to ensure that it would be 70% Israeli Jewish majority with a 30% Palestinian minority within East Jerusalem. And so one of the ways at limiting or capping the Palestinian population was via conferring them with only residency rights, which can then lead to revocations. And this, in essence, serves as a mechanism of displacement. What I want to just note here today, which is very interesting, is that the demographic ratio is actually approaching a 40-60, and it has led to increased demographic anxiety. And this is exemplified in statements by politicians, members of Knesset, and the intensification of measures of displacement, which we have all now heard today from the various speakers. And so in addition to contending with residency revocations, this status, which is tenuous, it's a temporal status, it doesn't afford them with full civil rights. So for instance, they are not afforded political rights or the power to participate in the legislative and policymaking processes which govern their lives. And then even when they are afforded socioeconomic rights, they are severely limited. And so what we have here, and this is why I wanted to kind of provide more of a background on what is driving these measures of displacement, is like what we have here is essentially a stateless minority group that are devoid of full civil rights. and also face a myriad of other discriminatory policies and pressures, which ultimately serve as levers of displacement. Aimed at what? Aimed at weakening the Palestinian presence in the city. At the same time, there are geopolitical implications. There are measures to also foil any prospect of Jerusalem ever serving as a shared capital between Israel and, say, an independent Palestinian state. And some of these measures have been covered already today. The mass demolitions of Palestinian property. Why is that? Is because there is a system of inequitable urban planning, a suppression of residential development by refusing to advance or approve zoning plans in US English, British English, it's outline plans. And if there is no outline plans or zoning plans, it precludes the issuance of building permits, which is why so many Palestinians face the threat of home demolitions, similar to what Suad was mentioning, the massive threat in Al Bustan, Silwan. There's also the confiscation of Palestinian land for building settlements. So basically what you have is you have these multifaceted and multi-level measures and levers of displacement that are employed against the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem. And then on top of this, if that wasn't enough, another lever is this form of evictions, which has already been mentioned, is primarily taking place in Sheikh Jarrah and also in Batan and Hawa Silwan. These are being initiated by ideological settler groups, but with the full support of the state, which the Israeli government has, as many of you probably are familiar with and aware, has relegated it to simply a private real estate dispute. Yet, what I want to underscore is that these measures are far beyond any private civil matter, but it's rather state sanctioned. It's carried out hand in glove with state entities, and it's through the exploitation of laws that discriminate essentially on the basis of ethno-national identity. So what do I mean by this, okay? The Israeli legal system basically affords one group, i.e. Israeli Jews, the right to retrieve lost properties in East Jerusalem from 1948, while depriving the same right from another group, i.e. East Jerusalem Palestinians, to reclaim properties that they have lost in West Jerusalem or other areas on the Israeli side of the Green Line, okay? The two laws that are at play here is a 1950 absentee property law and a 1970 law, which it's called the Legal and Administrative Matters Law, but it's a mouthful, so I'm going to use the 1970 law. Basically, the 1950 law enshrines that Palestinians who were forced to abandon their homes in Israel due to the War of 1948 cannot retrieve them. The 1970 law, on the other hand, affords Jews the right to reclaim lost assets in East Jerusalem, now inhabited by Palestinians, i.e. the ones in Sheikh Jarrah and Batan al-Hawa Silwan, on the claim or based on the claim that they were once owned by Jews prior to 1948. One of the things that's important to note here is that many of the Jews who actually lost assets, who say lost homes in East Jerusalem, which was a very small amount compared to the Palestinians who lost throughout Israel, but the ones that did lose assets, they were compensated with alternative properties in West Jerusalem at the time. So essentially what the 1970 law does is it entitles them to a double compensation. And so in addition to that, the law also provides for a very broad definition of those who can claim those properties on their behalf. And so this broad definition is exactly what has enabled ideological settler organizations to exploit the law for their own purposes in spite of having no relation to the previous Jewish occupants of these properties. So what you have here is not only acute discrimination implicit within the Israeli legal system, but then you have settler organizations who are working with the assistance of state bodies, general custodian, the registrar of trust, the custodian of absentee property, all sitting within the Ministry of Justice to utilize these laws to evict Palestinians from their home. And what is the ultimate goal? It is to expand Israeli settlement and control of East Jerusalem. And in this way, they undermine conditions for any agreed upon solution with the Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. And so, as I mentioned before, these measures are being concentrated in the most religiously and politically sensitive area in Jerusalem, essentially the epicenter of the conflict, if not as a whole. The old city and its surrounding Palestinian neighborhoods, which we mentioned before, Sheikh as to the north of the old city, and then to the south, Silwan. And in these two neighborhoods alone, we have, in terms of eviction, we have over 1,000 Palestinians that are facing displacement due to these eviction lawsuits that are filed by the settler organizations. If you want to add in demolitions, that those in Al-Bustan are facing 1,500 more Palestinians. So already we have 2,500 Palestinians that are all within a 7 square kilometer radius that are under threat of displacement. So what I want to emphasize here is this is far beyond a civil matter and a private real estate dispute, nor are they isolated in individual cases involving a few families, which in itself, of course, is devastating. But rather, this is a concerted and comprehensive settler takeover campaign that is being waged by powerful, well-funded settler groups who are aided and abetted by the state on all levels, and unfortunately, largely enjoy the complicity of the judiciary. And at this point, even with the unprecedented number of eviction cases to reach the courts in the past 2 years, and even with the unequivocal evidence that this is driven by political and ideological forces, unfortunately, the judiciary has yet to treat these cases from a much broader perspective beyond that of, say, a private property dispute. For example, treating it or adjudicating it from rather a perspective that includes a moral or geopolitical or humanitarian considerations, as well as international law, like the right to housing or the right to shelter, the right to family and community life. And so we've even seen these cases, we've even seen this in the Sheikh Jarrah cases that are pending at the Supreme Court, as Mohammed Sabah mentioned in his recording earlier, that instead of the judges handing down a substantive and principal ruling, they instead resort to proposing a settlement, which does not address the core injustice and discrimination that are implicit in these cases. And unfortunately, it appears that this is going to be the same case with the eviction lawsuits in Batn al-Hawa, which have also reached the Supreme Court. Just this past week, on Monday, there was another very decisive Supreme Court hearing. And while they adjourned without issuing a ruling at the time, it remains to be seen what the court will decide. From the way the proceedings played out, it doesn't appear that their treatment of this case will be any different. And so what I want to close is that this is not just about a few individuals or a few communities, but that in its totality, it is essentially a battle over Jerusalem and its identity, the core, the epicenter of the conflict. It is a territorial and demographic battle. And it's a concerted attempt to de-Palestinize Jerusalem, to undermine Palestinian rights to their homes in the city, and essentially erode the Palestinian presence through these levers of displacement. And so it is really incumbent upon the global community to fully comprehend these measures and the drivers behind them, as well as their implications, in order to hold Israel accountable to these actions or for these actions, and undertake steps to safeguard the rights of these families to remain safely in their homes, free from the constant threat of forcibly being uprooted and driven from their homes and communities. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cohen, for your important contribution. Now we want to move to a pre-recorded message by Father Jamil Khader for a spiritual perspective on the situation. Father Jamil, Reverend Jamil Khader, is from Episcopal Church in Jerusalem. He is currently coordinating meetings of the heads of churches, and he is also the Ecumenical Officer for the World Council of Churches in Jerusalem Liaison Office.
سلام المسيح معكم أحبائي.
Peace of Christ on you.
في البداية أعتذر
First of
عن
all, I'm
عدم
really
حضوري
sorry
شخصيا
I
في
couldn't be
هذا
with
اللقاء
you
بسبب
in
دواء
presence
السفر.
because of
وأنا
the
اليوم
complications
كتير
with the
مبسوط
trip.
إني أكون معكم
But I'm
وفي
really happy
وسطكم.
to be here among you.
اليوم بحب
I am
أعطي
here. I
لمحة
would like
تأمل عن الوضع اللي عم بتعيشه بلادنا، عم بتعيشه الأراضي المقدسة، عم بتعيشه هاي الأراضي الذي بدأت وانتشرت منها رسالة السلام إلى العالم أجمع. هذه الأرض اللي ولا مرة لحد هاي اللحظة قد رأت السلام بأم أعينها، ولكن نتعزى دائما في كلام الله في الكتاب المقدس الذي يقول لنا طوبى لصانعي السلام لأنهم أبناء الله يدعون. ونحن اليوم أحبائي لدينا هذه الطوبة، لدينا هذه التطويبات. كلمة طوبة يعني نيالك، فنيالك يا صانع السلام لأنك تدعى ابن الله. أنت صانع سلام اليوم لأنك تعمل السلام، أنت تسعى لكي تحصل على السلام. هذا السلام اللي إحنا دائما بنحاول ننشره بأعمالنا، بأفكارنا، بنوايانا، بمخططاتنا، ولكن بنشوف إنه القوة دائما بتلعب دور السياسي. بعيدا عن السياسة بنطلع اليوم إنه العالم بعيد كل البعد عن الله، وأنا بفكر إنه السبب الأساسي لعدم حصول الإنسان على السلام هو كره الإنسان لأخيه الإنسان. ونحن جميعا إخوة في الرب، جميعا إخوة نعمل معا لكي ننشر السلام إلى العالم الخارجي. ولكن إذا لا يوجد سلام في قلوبنا، لا يوجد سلام في ضمائرنا، لا يوجد سلام في حياتنا، لا نستطيع أن ننشر السلام إلى العالم. فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. إذا يجب أن نحصل على سلامنا الداخلي، يجب أن يكون هناك سلام في قلوبنا، سلام في حياتنا، سلام في ضمائرنا، نستطيع أن ننشر السلام إلى العالم الخارجي. هذا هو السلام الذي أتى به الرب يسوع المسيح إلى العالم، وقال سلامي أعطيكم، سلامي أمنح لكم. وبشر وقال المجد لله في الأعالي وعلى الأرض السلام وبالناس المسرة. نحصل على المسرة والفرح. أحبائي، ما يحصل في مدينة القدس وبشكل خاص في الأراضي المقدسة في سلوان، في كل المناطق التي تتعرض إلى الضغوطات والتأثيرات الاحتلال، نحن اليوم نقول بأن هذه الممارسات هي تسعى إلى كسر السلام وتحقيق العدالة، لأن الإنسان مظلوم والله لا يرضى بالظلم، ولكن الله يقف معنا وفي وسطنا وفي جانبنا في وسط الظلم، ويقول أنني معك، يساندك ويدعمك. أهم شيء في الكتاب المقدس الذي قاله لنا أن الاهتمام في الجسد هو موت، ولكن الاهتمام بالروح هو حياة وسلام. يقول لنا صاحب الرسالة بولس الرسول إلى أهل روميا. إذن أن نقوم بالاهتمام بالروح من أجل نشر السلام إلى العالم هو ضروري اليوم في حياتنا، وضروري بأن يكون العيش الذي نعيشه معا هو عيش مشترك على أساس السلام والأمان والطمأنينة. ليس من حقي ولا من حق أي إنسان آخر أن يتعدى على مصلحتي الشخصية بأن أكون صانع سلام على هذه الأرض. لذلك أدعوكم اليوم أحبائي بكل طوائفنا وبكل اتجاهاتنا، بكل أفكارنا وبكل نوايانا، أن نسعى دائما إلى زرع السلام في قلوب الناس. عندما نزرع السلام في قلوبهم، نزرع السلام في حياتهم، نزرع السلام في أعمالهم وأفكارهم، نستطيع أن نحصل على السلام الخارجي، السلام الذي نسعى إليه لنعيش بأمان وطمأنينة. لذلك أستودعكم بكلمة الرب الذي قالها لنا وليملأكم إله السلام كل سرور وسلام في الإيمان، وليملأكم إله الرجاء لتزدادوا في الرجاء بقوة الروح القدس. ربنا يكون معكم ويبارككم ويكون دائما سبب بركة وخلاص ليعطينا الفرح والسعادة والسلام للعالمين.
and this hope and this joy in this word. Peace be upon you. Thank you.
We would like to thank Father Khadir for his input. We have received some questions. So I have a question for Ms. Saad. So do you think it is important to have internationals present in the neighborhood of Silwan? Okay, it seems that Ms. Saad has technical issues. Then maybe we can move on for another questions for Ms. Cohen. Ms. Cohen, the question is, so you mentioned that these displacements that you mentioned are portrayed as real estate disputes. How would you recommend we disrupt this narrative?
Hi, thanks for the question. I honestly, I think it is ensuring that we're disseminating the correct information and the information that we have all provided, those most importantly to hear from the residents themselves that are being adversely impacted and that are under threat of displacement. And so by capturing their stories and their narrative and conveying that to the international community and being able to correct and to inform those that have perhaps adopted more of a Israeli propaganda, if I will, narrative of this being simply a real estate dispute. And I think what we have all laid out here for you today is that it's not simply a real estate dispute, but it is an actual concerted strategic policy that is being employed in order to expand Jewish settlement and displace Palestinians from the cities. So I think any outlets and platforms that you may have, whether it's within our churches or within our communities or congregations and religious circles, or whether it's on social media. So whatever those platforms are, to utilize it and to exploit them for the purpose of spreading the truth. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. We have another question from Mr. Brown. Was there one thing you could share with us about your time as an EA that has stayed with you?
Yes, look, I think, the most striking thing was the steadfastness communicated to me by community members in the face of such significant and layered on adversity, whether it be detentions, arrests, demolitions, and significant financial burdens. That was what gave me real hope and what really inspired me to think about how I can continue to help to tell their story, because it's so powerful and so inspiring, and I look forward to going back someday.
Thank you. I want to try again with Ms. Saad. Ms. Saad, سمعتينا؟
The international community standing by us will help us, and we would like that our message reaches worldwide to know what the state of Israel is doing. They don't respect the religious places and the religious places for Muslims or for Christians. Al-Quds, obviously, especially in Al-Quds, from my point of view. In Silwan is not only Batn al-Hawa. Silwan, there's lots of districts that are occupied by settlers. Al-Bustan as well, 88 houses, 1,500 people, they're under the threat. So, because they want to build a leisure place or city for the settlers, and they already built tunnels underneath those houses, and the houses are already falling apart, and some starting to have some structural issue. Hawa Rabadi as well, the olive trees as well, that are really sacred, and they just take it off and they cut it off, and they put other type of trees. and they put artificial trees and just to change the landscape. Wadi Assur also is object of these actions. Ain al-Lose, they are not only in Hay Silwan. We hope that our message reaches everyone worldwide concerning what's happened in Silwan. There's lots of people, a high number of population living there. We want an international community backing us. We don't want international community to be silent over this. For example, Jabal al-Zaytun, they will move then from an area to another area, and the old neighbor, all the Jews and the old city, Ujafat, or Beit Hanin. So this, what they are doing now in this district, they will apply it and do it somewhere else. They want all lands for them, like they are doing for Al-Quds, and they want it as a capital of Israel, and that's it. This is what they are doing. So we want this support from the international community.
شكرا كثير مسعاد. Thank you so much for the summary, and I would like also to thank all of our speakers and the audience. Thank you for sharing your voices and testimonies, and thank you for being with us tonight. I wish a nice evening to all of you. Thank you.